And first of all, I just want to thank Deputy Collins and her office for the work that's gone into this, and I want to support it. And indeed, I welcome that the government appears not to have put in any amending motion, and that you're accepting this motion, and so that's positive. I'm struck by the difference in language in relation to this. I'll just go local for a minute and I'll come back to the language. Lately, we fought a battle in Galway, all TDs, in relation to a community centre, the need for it in Newcastle and the West Side area, Newcastle. And they fought a battle and they had to go under a particular fund and they lost out. And it struck me, and it struck the people behind this, why wasn't it part of the area in the first place with all the development that went on, instead of having to go off and try and source it under a fund, and a whole nightmare, and they didn't get it. Fast forward to the budget, and then we were left meeting the minister to try and create a special fund for new community centres, because the one that existed was just for enhancing. And I think that's underway now. And I say all of that by listening to my colleague Deputy Collins talk about dynamic Drimna and what she set out, and immediately caught my attention as to the language of the people and what's needed in an area. And then I look at this letter here from the Dublin City Council. I'm not commenting on councils, but I have a letter here before me that's in response to this issue. And first of all, they apologise. This is from the head of finance. A fair play to the person. It's a very comprehensive letter. But the contrast in language is stark. And maybe that's where the problem is, where we've gone. We've ignored communities, we've ignored the needs of communities and what's actually necessary to have a living community, which is at the back of this motion. So if we look at this report to the Finance Strategic Policy Committee, first of all, there's an apology because there were other priorities and there were other stresses on the Council, so they never actually got to tease this out where it should have been teased out on the special SPC on finance. So now we have this, and at the bottom they say, well, actually it'll be teased out in the public consultation on levies. But that's not a way to tease out that, because the levies have continued since they were brought in that manner, and we don't have equity of access to the levies. Quite clear from what we're seeing here. I'm no expert, but certainly serious issues have been raised as to what communities get what and when they get it and how they get it. So let's go back to this letter. First of all, it hasn't been discussed because there were other priorities. That shocks me really, because the issue with levies exists everywhere and has existed for a very long time. And they talk about they have to do it at a whole of city level, a strategic level. And I understand that. I found myself swinging back and forth until I looked at the reality or the consequences of the way the levies have been distributed. And that's the problem. So I'm swinging with this language until I see the word public asset deficits. Public asset deficits. That's what we're talking about here. And I wonder, what language is this? Community wealth building. And they've set up a community wealth building working group. And apparently it's doing very well. And it's going to have an implementation plan to a key principle in the 21st century, in 2023. A key principle of community wealth building is equity in access to public facilities. So it's worth reading. It's really worth reading the 3.5 pages, because it absolutely captures what has happened with language. Language has been captured in corporate language, and we're talking about public assets as opposed to community, and what Deputy Collins has outlined for the dynamic Drimna and what's necessary. It could be replicated in Galway and every other place, but we get absolutely choked with this type of language and no recognition that it's time for an analysis. Some areas in Dublin are known as better areas. They seem to get more levies. I'm no expert, and I don't know if that's right. That's what's been said by councillors. And at the same time, then the same councillors are saying, well, no, we really want what we're getting here. But it seems to me, with what we're facing, with the figures that have been quoted for over 60,000 houses per year and all the development that's going ahead, notwithstanding the crisis, notwithstanding that we're shouting at you daily to do something about the housing crisis, it can't be done on its own. It must be matched with community plans. What has been mentioned here, dynamic Drimna. There must be a recognition that we can't put up structures just for the sake of a crisis to say we're doing something without having a living, breathing community with proper facilities, and a real honest talk about how many stories are appropriate. Deputy Collins mentioned 4 stories. I absolutely agree with her. That dialogue is missing in Galway as well. What type of city do we want? What type of towns do we want, while all the time solving the housing crisis and facing our climate obligations? Thank you again to the Deputy Collins.